Welcome to Home Middle School's presentation of All About Vaping. I'm so glad that you guys could come out on a rainy night. My name is Julie Auslander. I'm the school counselor. I'm here every day. And we just feel it's so important to get this information out. This is my 4th year at Hall, and I'm surprised still at how much parents still just don't know about Juuls. And so, you know, every year at Hall, we've been trying to blanket our student body and get the message out to parents more and more. And I feel like we're doing a really good job this year. Basically, we have a presentation at each grade level. So all the 6th graders, 7th graders, and 8th graders are all going to get a presentation on tobacco prevention and Juuls and e-cigarettes. So, and now we're doing this parent ed event at night. So I feel like, you know, we're getting the word out, which is a really great thing. And I'm really excited that the Coalition Connection with Linda Henn has been a partner with us, and the Parent Education Committee has also really been supportive in getting this event together. So I have the pleasure to present Linda Henn. Thank you so much for being here and organizing the panel.
Thank you. So we're here to talk about vaping. It's a significant problem in our communities, and it's vaping, nicotine, and cannabis is fast becoming a national problem. We will talk about facts, but most importantly, we're going to talk about solutions. Tonight you will hear from Jazzy Garrity, who works for BACR, Smoke Free Marin, and the Coalition Connection. And also Jennifer Taylor, president of Jet Ed Consulting, a therapeutic education consulting firm. Jennifer specializes in adolescent and family systems. We will have a panel joined by Julie Auslander and Delaney, a student from Redwood. And you'll have time for Q&A at the end of the presentation. I'm going to forget to do this. So I work for the Coalition Connection, which works to reduce underage substance use in the Redwood and Drake school districts. We work to change community norms around adult and youth substance use through a variety of initiatives, including education and environmental strategies. The Coalition Connection works to reduce underage substance use in these communities, and we try to change community norms. Wait a minute, I think I'm repeating myself. The Coalition Connection was formed by joining the Twin Cities Coalition for Healthy Youth and the Ross Valley Healthy Community Collaborative. Together, the two organizations applied for a drug-free community grant, which is a federal grant, and we actually got the grant, which we were surprised because only 5 coalitions got it in California and 75 throughout the country. So the drug-free communities believes that local problems require local solutions. And they believe in 7 strategies. And tonight we are going to provide information, provide support, and through vaping, we're going to try to modify and change policies to make a difference in substance use. So now I'm going to turn it over to Jazzy.
And let's bring Delaney up here too, since she's going to be doing some presenting. Hi, everybody. My name's Jazzy Garrity, and like Linda said, I work with the Coalition Connection and with Bay Area Community Resources, focusing on youth tobacco prevention. So a big reason why we're here tonight is because the data recently came out from 2017-2018 California Healthy Kids Survey. So this is a survey that goes out every 2 years to all high school 9th and 11th graders and all middle school 7th graders. This is the most accurate data we have around the usage rates of youth in our community. So if you look over here, we have the percent of students who have ever used an electronic cigarette or other vaping device. The gray bars is kind of hard to see from where you are, but the gray bars are the 2015-2016 data, and the blue bars are the 2017-2018 data. So there's been a significant increase in students who have ever used these vaping devices. Among 11th graders, it went from 39% to 47% of 11th graders who have tried these vaping devices. That's about half of 11th graders, so that's something that we're very concerned about. What is almost even more alarming is the percent of students who are current users of these vaping products. So the past 30-day rates of using these products have doubled in each category. 7th grade, yes, it started as 2%, which is fairly low. However, it's jumped up to 5%, and that's definitely something that we should consider among the younger ages. Among 9th graders, it went from 9% to 20% of current users of these products, and among 11th graders, it went from 11% to 28%, which means that there's almost a third of 11th graders who are current users of these products, and that's past 30-day use. Next slide. So as far as marijuana goes, we see something quite similar. For the 2015-2016 data, we have the gray bars right over here, and the green bars are the 2017-2018 data. The far right column is non-traditional schools, so don't focus on the decrease right there, because that isn't applicable to this school here, or that's more the non-traditional schools within our community. So we actually have had an increase in marijuana use among 11th graders in the public school system, an increase among 9th graders, and an increase among 7th graders. And past 30-day use is the same. It's increased in all those categories as well. So a lot of people have been saying on the news and around the state that we have had a decrease in marijuana use since legalization, which happened last January, pardon me. But that's actually incorrect. We have had an increase in Marin County of marijuana use. So what are e-cigarettes? E-cigarettes came on the market 2007, and they weren't very cool. They looked like these. They weren't very popular. The basic anatomy is up here in the right corner. You have a battery. So the battery gets charged up. The battery heats up the atomizer, which then heats up the e-liquid container, and then gets inhaled through the mouthpiece. So this is the very basic anatomy of what an e-cigarette looks like and how it works. However, we do have more complicated versions that are being put on the market nowadays. So here's the new generation. So from 2007 to now, we have had thousands of different products being put on the market. So I'm going to go through these. These are some of the different types that there are. In the upper left corner, this box-looking one, that one's called a mod, and that is actually charged via battery, so it delivers a more intensified hit to the user. Next to that one, there's the e-pipe. It uses the same e-liquid juice that's in other vaporizers, so it's not actually very different. It just is shaped differently and looks a bit different. Over on the far right side, there's the e-hookah. It works similarly to a hookah, however, it's disposable and you don't reuse the e-hookahs. They're a one-use product. The Juul down here in the bottom left, we'll talk more about that one specifically because that's the most popular one that's being used among youth. Next to that is Sorin, another very popular one that's being used among youth. And Fix, which is on the far right side, which is a more it's a knockoff version of Juul, and there's many other ones that are being used, and I'm sure Delaney can speak to that as far as later on in the presentation. So for cannabis vaporizers, so there's two types of vaporizers for cannabis. There's a vaporizer and a dab pen. So a lot of people get these confused and mixed up. A vaporizer is cannabis oil, and a dab pen is waxes and concentrates, and it actually can use the bud in the device. So a very popular vaporizer on the market right now is PAX. PAX is this one in the upper right corner, and that one right there is a vaporizer, so it uses cannabis oil. This one in the bottom left is a dab pen, which is also by the same brand. It's a bit thicker and looks very similar. However, it holds up, or it has more waxes and concentrates in it. So when we're looking at cannabis concentrates, this is kind of what today's cannabis looks like. It doesn't look like what it did back in the day. It doesn't look like the plant that you usually have growing and you smoke it, about 3% THC content. This is today cannabis and the concentrates. These concentrates have really high potency levels. If you want to go to the next. So smoked cannabis, we have about 11% THC potency, and it's been increasing throughout the years. So back in the Woodstock era, it was about 3% THC levels. Now it's about 11% THC potency. Medical grade cannabis plants are up to 35% THC. And concentrates, which are shatter, honey oil, waxes, and etc., are 40% to 80% THC. So at a federal level, we're only regulating up to 15% THC. So when they do research studies, they're not looking at anything that's higher than 15%. So that's just something important to note when the studies come out, is that they're actually not looking at what the street cannabis is as far as potency levels. So we're going to go back to nicotine. So the kind of history of nicotine is that in 1763 it was first commercially marketed as an insecticide. Main reason is they were growing tobacco plants and the bugs weren't eating it, and they said, hold on, let's use this and kill other bugs from eating the other crops. So they discovered that it happens to be one of the most potent poisons that there are for your body. It's toxic to any organ, and that includes the brain, altering neurocognition. So we'll talk a little bit about how it actually impacts your body further on in the presentation. Oh, right now. So nicotine impacts your nervous system. So similarly to how when you drink, you get really dehydrated and you drink a big glass of water. So you drink a big glass of water and your body releases this chemical called acetylcholine. The acetylcholine binds to the receptors across the gap between your neurons, or your neurons, and binds to these receptors over here on the other side, and they release dopamine, and it says, good job, you had your water, your body wanted water, and so it releases dopamine as your happiness or your reward. So what nicotine does is nicotine actually mocks acetylcholine. So when it's in your body, it binds to these receptors on the other side and releases dopamine saying, good job, you had your nicotine fix. Your body wanted nicotine, so what it did is it releases this dopamine and it just completely mimics the shape of the acetylcholine and binds to those receptors on the other side. So what's the problem with that? What's the problem with having tons of dopamine in your body and feeling great all the time? That's what I always say. That's what I always say to my high schoolers. I'm like, well, what's the problem? You feel great. It's awesome. So the neurocognition part. So once your body has this nicotine starting to go through its system, the body starts to not be able to, or starts to produce less and less acetylcholine on its own. So it doesn't need acetylcholine to get that release of dopamine anymore in the body. So what it does is the body starts to shut down the ability to create the acetylcholine, and so because it doesn't need it. So when you stop using cigarettes, that's this sense of withdrawal because your body doesn't have that acetylcholine in it to have those feelings of pleasure in the body. So when that starts to happen, it's actually altering the way that you see and think about how nicotine works. So the brain is rewiring itself so that it thinks that the only way that you can be happy is through this fix of nicotine. As many of you know, nicotine, or the prefrontal cortex of an adolescent, are not fully developed yet. So, for example, for females, you have, I think it's 25 is when your brain becomes fully developed, and for males, it's 26 or 27. So Delaney and I both technically don't have our prefrontal cortexes fully developed. I'm 24. She's in high school, 17, yep. 17 years old. So our prefrontal cortexes are still being rewired. Hopefully mine's almost done. But basically what is happening is if we started to use a product like this, it would be more intensified, and that dependence would be increased. So what would happen is it would cause our personal prefrontal cortexes, which control all of these functions: empathy, insight, response flexibility, emotion regulation, body regulation, morality, intuition, attuned communication, fear modulation. There's depression, there's anxiety, there's a lot of things that this prefrontal cortex does. So it would make those things harder for us to be able to cope with, in a sense, because our brain is so dependent on something else for the feelings of pleasure that when you're feeling depression and you overcome it, you're not going to have that dopamine release like you once had. So here are some of the health impacts. So vaping versus smoking. Do you want to click a couple more? Yeah, click through it. So vaping is, a common misconception with vaping is that it's water vapor. That is, it's not necessarily a water vapor. It's definitely a vapor, however, it's an aerosol. So an aerosol is more closely related to a hairspray than it is related to steam burning off or coming off a kettle. So the nicotine needs to bind to a chemical in order to become an aerosol, and that aerosol and that chemical is what's hitting the back of the throat and going through the respiratory system. With smoke, you have smoke, obviously, and that smoke is from combustion, which causes tar in your lungs. For vaping, we have nicotine, which is derived from the tobacco plant into a liquid. For smoking, you actually have the tobacco plant or the cannabis plant in the smoke, or in the whatever you're smoking it out of or device. For vaping, there are no longitudinal studies that are conducted thus far. So a longitudinal study is watching someone who uses the product throughout their lifetime. And for smoking, we do have longitudinal studies, and those studies actually do link it to cancer. For vaping, we have appealing to younger ages. It's become very popular among young people. It's been deemed an epidemic at a national level. For smoking, we have a lot more social stigma around it. You can't smoke inside. There's a lot more policies in place, and it's more noticeable. So we have some stigmas against using those products. One more thing I was going to add, something that's come up among youth, is the concept of ghosting or getting domed, which I'm sure Delaney and some of the other high schoolers could speak to as well. Ghosting is when you inhale a vaping device and you actually hold the vapor in your mouth until it condensates, and then you swallow it back through your digestive tract. So it's going both through your respiratory tract and your digestive tract. Getting domed is when you increase or you breathe into such a high quantity of vapor into your body that you're actually getting nicotine toxicity in the bloodstream, and so that is another term that's been used by high school students. So for cigarette chemicals, there's lots of chemicals in cigarettes. There's a lot of heavy metals, there's a lot of things that we're really concerned about, and a lot of these are cancer-causing agents on their own. When we start to look at e-cigarettes, we have all of the same chemicals that have been found in cigarettes have also been found in e-cigarettes. We also know that, so in a second, some of these are going to turn yellow. Click. Oh. Maybe not. So some of these, there's about 12 of them that usually turn yellow, but oh yeah, now it's going to work. One more click. Did it work? Okay. Well, some of them, there's a handful of them, and I can send the list out later, but some of them are deemed harmful and potentially harmful substances by the FDA. A majority of those ones are the heavy metals that are in here, and there's a couple, like I believe the glycerin's in there and formaldehyde and a handful of the other chemicals on this list that are deemed harmful and potentially harmful substances. So we're going to talk a little bit about Juul. Juul is the most popular vaping device among youth users. All Juuls contain nicotine. A study that came out by the Truth Initiative indicated that 63% of Juul users didn't know that the product contained nicotine in it. That is very alarming. I've talked to a lot, hopefully in our community that's a little bit different, but at a national level, 63% don't know that there's nicotine. So in each Juul pod, there's about a pack of cigarettes. So here is one Juul pod, right here. So this tiny little square thing, which you can all take a look at, and I'll have everything up here, this is one whole pack of cigarettes worth of nicotine. So going through many of these at a time, that's about 20 cigarettes is in a pack, so you're going through 20 cigarettes in one of these. Inside each one of those little cubes, right there, there's 4 chemicals. There's glycerol, propylene glycol, natural oils, and benzoic acid. So glycerol and propylene glycol, so let's start with benzoic acid. So benzoic acid is the chemical that binds to nicotine, and that's what aerosolizes it. So benzoic acid is going through the respiratory system when you consume these products. Propylene glycol is also a chemical that's used in the composition to help aerosolize it. Both propylene glycol and benzoic acid have been approved by the FDA. They have been approved for the consumption of them. So they have been approved to go as a food preservative to go through your digestive system. And a food preservative, as we know, helps food products from becoming moldy. So those two are approved for food preservatives, but they're not approved for inhalation. So they're approved for your digestive tract and to go through your stomach, but they're not approved to go through your respiratory tract. That is a common misconception as well, is that these chemicals are legal and approved, but they're not necessarily being used for the approved usage of them. Glycerol is another one that we're definitely concerned about in high doses. I have it right here. It's commonly used in antifreeze, laxatives, paints, and explosives. It causes side effects that include headaches, dizziness, bloating, nausea, vomiting, thirst, and diarrhea. So in excessive amounts on its own, those are some concerns that we have of having too much of this product. And oh, here's what it looks like too. So I'll have this up here, and we can actually pass it around to people if you want a closer look at what the Juul looks like. So I'm going to pass it over to Delaney, and she's going to talk about the corporations and some of the marketing techniques.
Okay, just hold it. Yeah. Okay, hi, my name's Delaney. I'm a junior at Redwood High School. I'm part of TUPE, which is the Tobacco Use Prevention Educators, which we started my junior year, or my sophomore year at Redwood. And it's just a group of students who come together, and we're just trying to make a difference within Redwood in the community. And we are going to come to Hall and educate the 6th graders. And then we also educate incoming 9th graders at Redwood and just give them an overview. And we don't really tell them not to do it. We're just giving them information and kind of so they can make their own opinion. We don't want to be pressuring them or making them feel uncomfortable, but we're there just as a support system. So who owns what? So as you can see, Views on the right is a big owner, Market 10 in the middle, and Blue. So who owns what? So Juul was previously owned by Paxi, which is a marijuana company, and now it is owned by Ultra. And Ultra is a very successful company and is making over $15 billion. And so 73% of all purchases are of Juuls. So as Jazzy said earlier, Juuls are kind of the most popular kind of tobacco, nicotine kind of product. There's also Market 10, Logic, Views, and Blue. So as you can see in the graph below, so retail ads, which is kind of what you see at gas stations above when you're purchasing your food or products, 52% of, 52 middle school students say that they've experienced, like they've seen retail ads, and 56% of high school students. Internet ads, so if you're Googling something for school, I know I've been Googling something for my class, and I've seen ads for Juul come up. And so middle schoolers say that they've seen 35%, and high schoolers say they've seen 42% of internet ads. TV movie ads. Middle schoolers say that they've seen 34% of ads from Juul, and high schoolers have seen 38%. And newspapers, magazine ads, that's where I think a lot of students do see ads for juuling and nicotine products. So it says that middle school students have seen 25%, and high school students have seen 34%. So advertising. So even though Juuls are supposed to prevent adults and kind of get them off like their addiction to smoking, we see that advertising towards teens and adolescents is very prevalent within society today. So as you can see, they're using really bright colors that are kind of making students or teens, like, it's just very, very noticeable. So as you can see, they're using, to the left, they're saying like, oh, you want to act like this person, this guy is very cool, so juuling must be very cool. So it's just a misconception. They're using different flavors, as we'll talk about later, to get students kind of into the nicotine products. So they have cherry flavors, apple flavors, gummy bear flavors, just everything that will appeal to adolescents. As you can see, they use like sexual appeal too to kind of get teenagers into the juuling products. And then also, one thing that I found very strange, in the kind of the billboard right there, they use Santa Claus to advertise it. And a lot of teens trust Santa Claus, and a lot of students, and I know like that's like my idol when I was a younger individual in middle school. I looked up to Santa Claus. I thought it was amazing. I loved it. So Santa Claus is holding a vape. So it's just basically telling adolescents that it's okay to do it, and like maybe someone that you looked up to for the longest time and that you wait for every year to see is doing it, it's okay, which is just completely terrible in so many different ways. Advertising normalization. So creme brulee. So it's just basically showing that Juuls, it's okay. Creme brulee is so nice and it's like relaxing. Like creme brulee is so amazing. It's really tasty. But in reality, it's propylene and glycol and benzoyl acid. And this is more of a sciencey definition, which they're not going to advertise with. They're not going to advertise that it's terrible for you. And they're going to kind of do the misconception that it's all great, like there's no side effects, and that it's just perfect and like nothing harmful is going to come of it. So flavoring products. As I said before, they are starting to come up with many flavoring products. So these are just some examples, but there's hundreds of them. And basically the most popular are Jolly Rancher, Life Savior, like Kool-Aid, Zigzag Wrap. I've seen like they're doing cereal flavors now for like breakfast, so in the morning. I think they're coming up with some new ones, but basically this is just advertising towards students. And basically these are a lot of foods and products that students kind of enjoy. And as a kid, you're really excited. You'll have some candy. And basically, it doesn't really help adults because adults are just doing it to get off and to stop their addiction of smoking. But in reality, it's just causing students to become addicted with nicotine from kind of the advertising of all these fun flavors that they think would be nice to try.
So like Delaney was talking about, the advertising is big. An important note that I just wanted to add on to is those Juul ads that were in the upper right corner. Like we were pointing at earlier, those look sleek and they're targeting adolescents. Something to consider too is that the head marketing director for Juul actually came from Apple computers. So a lot of the packaging and the containers look like sleek Apple devices on a blank white screen that look cool and interesting. So that's definitely an important thing to note. As far as cigarette and e-cigarette ads, so they haven't really changed much. So back in 1941, this is an advertisement by Philip Morris, More Freedom from Throat Irritation. This is a blue ad from 2013. It says, "Take back your freedom." So what the companies are really doing is they're saying, look, this worked back in 1941. It's going to work again. So they're not changing as much about their advertising techniques anymore because they know it's going to work. So this is just one example, and here is one more example of a Camel ad and a Vepo ad. Same thing, they're both on a motorcycle. They changed it from a camel to a female, both wearing leather jackets, both very independent and in control of what they're doing. So the same thing, 1993 to 2013, same advertising. So we're going to talk a little bit about the laws and regulations. So for e-cigarette laws and regulations, there was a law that came out in 2016 that was passed by the FDA, and it said that all new e-cigarettes that are put on the market have to meet the standards of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. This is called the Deeming Law, and it was passed in 2016. So many e-cigarette companies, like the 5 that Delaney went through with Juul, Mark 10, Blue, Logic, and Views, they had already been created prior to this law going into place. So they were grandfathered into this law, and they were not going to be tested for another period of time. The deeming law states that compliance for those products, like I said, have until 2022 to file for exemptions before they will begin to test the products. So those 5 companies would have had until 2022. However, this law has been postponed under current regulations and government. So right now, all e-cigarettes are not going to be regulated until 2022 or until this postponement period is over, which means that those products up there will not be regulated for another 2-year exemption period after the implementation of this law. So that means that they would have until 2024 before they will start to regulate those products. So that's discouraging at the federal level. We do have local policies that we have independently. So Marin County is made up of 12 different cities and the Marin County unincorporated jurisdiction. So for many of you, if you have been reading the Marin IJ and the local newspapers, Marin County unincorporated just passed a comprehensive flavor ban law. So that means that all retailers in Marin County unincorporated jurisdictions will be unable to sell flavored tobacco products or menthol products in any retail outlets in those areas. With that said, we do have some other cities that have also followed suit. In Sausalito, they also passed a comprehensive law that includes menthol and flavor. So in the upcoming year, they will be banning those from being sold in any outlet in Sausalito. Fairfax has a flavor ban law, but it does not include menthol. And Novato has a flavor ban law as well that doesn't include menthol at this current time. We are here in Larkspur. Larkspur doesn't have a flavored tobacco ban currently. And so that's definitely something to think about as a community member. I went to 7-Eleven and I just bought this over the counter right before I came here. And I bought another one right here. And so these are very accessible. They're here, they're at 7-Eleven, they're at gas stations down the road. They're very much prevalent in this community. And so making sure that you're aware of the local retailers in your area. Next slide. So I'm going to pass it back to Delaney, and she's going to talk a little bit about the signs that your teenager might be vaping.
Okay, so there's not any real signs, and it's definitely hard to see, but as you can see, this is a Juul, and it's very easy for students to put in their back pocket because it's so thin. People can put it in their pencil pouches, under their pillow. There's just so many different spots that they can hide it, and it's hard to find. But I know different ways that parents are starting to crack down on their kids. For example, some individuals have credit cards or debit cards that their parents will put money on for food. So basically, no student or individual is going to buy a Juul from the gas station with their credit card because their parents are going to see their transactions. So a lot of students are taking money out of their savings or their banking account. So if you see individuals or your daughters or sons taking money out in large sums, like $30 to $50, and they're kind of lying about it, or it doesn't seem accurate, their description of what they're using the money for, that's one good kind of sign that they might be using tobacco products or other substances. Also, Juuls have a fruity kind of marijuana smell. Very hard to describe, but you will recognize it if you hopefully will never have to, but it is like a fruity smell. And if you see these cartridges kind of laying around, I've seen them in parking lots, kind of like on the side of the streets, but they have like different colors, so they're kind of noticeable. That's a good kind of representation that there could be kind of signs of juuling. Also, there's batteries and chargers that this is what they look like, and they can plug them into their computer to charge their Juul, and which is kind of a commonplace. Sometimes you'll see it in schools. I know Redwood's cracked down and it doesn't happen anymore, but I know when staff didn't know what a Juul looked like and it was beginning to come people would be like, oh, it's like a USB or like a, like something you put into the camera. Oh, I'm just like charging my phone or like iPod. And now everyone's kind of educated on what it is. So basically, if you see, it literally looks harmless, but this is like kind of what kids use to charge their Juuls. We talked about discard. So that is it for the signs.
How much did those two things cost? That you
Depends. The Juuls
So
is more expensive.
Okay, this one, I just went to the store, so this one's $15. The Juul usually costs $30, however they can go on sale and be down to $15. I've seen them on sale for $15. And they, like we were just saying, they just hook right into the flash drive and can be charged off of a computer. Mm-hmm. The pods, so you get a pack of Juul pods, and they're $15.99 for a pack of pods, which is actually a lot cheaper than buying a pack of cigarettes. So using these products is cheaper for the user. However, I mean, it's more expensive than if you weren't using anything at all, but it's relatively cheaper in comparison to using cigarettes.
And adding on to what Jazzy said, you don't really replace the Juul. You, like individuals who have it, you keep this for a while, but what the adolescents are buying are the Juul pods, which they adds up in costs. And once individuals get addicted, you go through them very fast. So you're spending lots of money on the individual Juuls itself.
Mm-hmm. Totally, and there's been some high schoolers that have mentioned that there are students going through 2 pods a day, which is, if you think about it, that's 2 packs of cigarettes worth of nicotine a day. And it's definitely, nicotine is one of the most addictive substances that there are. It's kind of related closely to heroin at the addictive properties of it. So having 2 packs of cigarettes or 2 packs of Juul pods a day is definitely going to impact the user.
And impact their schoolwork, because if you're addicted and you have to constantly go into the hallway or the bathroom to Juul and not focus on your studies, what we're trying to do is make sure that doesn't happen, where kids don't get to that stage where it's really hard to quit.
Mm-hmm. And with that, we're going to pass it off to Jennifer, who's going to come up here and talk about family dynamics.
So hi, I'm Jennifer Taylor, and I am here to talk a little bit about how to talk with your child with the topic of juuling or pot or smoking or whatever is going on in your family that is not consistent with your values or what you're hoping for your child. So I don't know about you, but as a parent, that freaks me out the last 45 minutes. Thank you, ladies, for really turning on the freak factor. And I think I have a graphic.
I don't know why they're not showing up.
Oh no, I have such great graphic arts. Do I have to mimic them now? Oh no, all my graphics went away. Well, basically it's a lady going like this. Okay, so, which would represent that you have found a vape pen. So what do you do? So first of all, one of the main things as a parent, as you are watching your adolescent develop from the sweet, cuddly kid that they were to a more independent adolescent into high school, is relationship. In my practice, I will tell you that relationship is the hallmark of what is going to keep you and your child together as you progress through middle school and high school. So how do we keep that relationship when we just found a vape pen? So this is a true story that happened to my sister. And my nephew was at this point, I think, in 7th or 8th grade. And she went into his room, and underneath a stuffed animal on his chair was a vape pen. And she called me because, I'm the parenting guru in the family. And thankfully it wasn't my son. And so she called me and she's like, I am so hot. I don't even know what to say. My blood's boiling and da-da-da. I'm going to bring the hammer down. This is it. The hammer is coming down now. And I said, okay. So like, woo, okay. Let's take a step back because that's not going to work. You go at somebody hot, they're going to come right back at you, and it's going to be this. So with this relationship piece, if you find something that is inconsistent with your family values, and just as an aside, I think it's important to figure out what those are and have a conversation with your children about, these are the family values that we have. This is what's important to us as a family. That becomes kind of part of that relationship discussion. At that moment, what you first want to do is take yourself as far away from the emotion of that. So you're not going to have the conversation right when you found it. Your son or daughter is having a snack or doing their homework in the kitchen. You're not busting in there, on fire. We're going to have this conversation right now. Nope. You're going to take your time out. You're going to get yourself together. You're going to think about what's the best way to approach your son or daughter, and that is with compassion and curiosity. You want to maintain that trusting relationship, and the way you are going to do that is by treating your child with the compassion that you would treat anybody else that was important in your life and with whom you wanted to maintain that relationship. Now, of course, you're the parent. You need to set the boundaries and create the house environment that is right for your family. But that compassion and that lack of emotion is going to bring the temperature down and is going to allow your young person to speak to you in a way that's more honest and authentic to what's really going on, and that's what we want. We want our kids to talk to us. So I call this my curious question, and someday I'm going to write a whole book about the curious question. The curious question goes something like this. So Delaney's going to be I found your vape pen under my pillow and I'm really hot about it. But I've calmed down and now I have compassion, and instead of lecture, I'm going to listen. And the curious question goes something like this. Hey Delaney, I found this vape pen in your room. What's that all about? And Delaney will say, what? I don't know, vape pen? And whatever or she could say, well, that wasn't mine, and how did you find it, and why were you in my room, and that's my room, and you can't go in my room, that's my personal property. Whatever the response is, you just stay asking questions. So the curiosity factor for the parent is uncover what your child knows and how they feel about it. Okay, just like you would have any question with a sibling or a friend when you're trying to understand their point of view and maintain that connection and compassion. So for my sister, I said, I would ask Benjamin, hey Ben, I found this vape pen in your room. I'm kind of freaked out. What's this all about? What does this mean to you? Okay, so you're just asking them to explain their point of view. You're not attacking them about it. You're not telling them they're a bad kid. You're not calling them out on, I knew you would be doing this and all your friends are doing it. You're just asking them, what is your perspective on what this situation is? And then you start having a dialogue, and you can play a little dumb. I mean, now you know a lot about vaping. you might ask, like, oh, where'd you get it? What do you, how do you use it? What's it like? What do you like about it? Do you do it often? Do your friends do it? Where do you do it? Just a number of questions just to get the dialogue going. And you may not get much at that first interaction. But what you're definitely going to get is something from your child which is more akin to, my parents are curious and concerned and interested in me and what I'm doing versus I'm now the bad kid and now I'm going to get punished and now I really don't want to ever talk to my parents about anything. And so as this progresses, you will find in high school, if you can try to continue to maintain that relationship, that the conversations are going to get harder, but you're going to have established a certain foundation that works for you and your family. And this is going to look different in every family, but what I told my sister was to calm down, find a good time to talk to Ben, take the vape out, and just ask him. She doesn't know where he got it, had he used it, did he get it from a friend? Maybe he was just curious what it looked like. Putting all of your ideas and all your fears ahead of what's actually happening is what's going to get in the way. I don't know, all my graphics are gone. Okay, we did the curious question. The other thing I would say is when you talk about the values in your family, and I think that after that conversation, then you have kind of a family discussion about what the values are. And instead of saying, you're not allowed to vape, you're not allowed to, stay out late, use I statements. And I know we're probably sick to death of the I feel statement, but in this context, it's, I'm uncomfortable with the fact that I found a vape pen in your room. So you are not accusing them of doing anything other than the fact that the reality is they have a vape pen. So there's nothing to argue about. And you're expressing your own feeling about what's happening. And then you can say, in our family, we try to have a healthy lifestyle. And what I've learned about vaping is inconsistent with that. And so I think in our family, we are going to have a general guideline that vaping is not okay, and then you can move on from there. But if you start with how you feel about it, I'm uncomfortable with vaping, I feel scared when I know that you're vaping, however that feels to you, and hopefully that makes sense that it's not a you statement about what they're doing and that naturally makes them feel defensive. This also works in high school when you talk about other things. And then coming up with boundaries. We are parents. We get to make the rules. We are molding prefrontal lobe development, and whatever's going to get in the way of that, it's our job to protect it. And so whatever that means to you in your household is truly your space. If you set a boundary and you set a consequence, make sure that that is a reasonable consequence and make sure you stick to it. It is very hard. I am not saying any of this is easy. What I think makes it harder is if you have a consequence that you know you can't keep. So don't go overboard. Sit down and maybe you have a conversation with your son or daughter and say, hey, what do you think is a reasonable consequence if, and I'll use gaming because I have a lot of clients who game too much. What's the consequence if you game 20 more minutes after I tell you it's time to stop? I don't know. Well, maybe the consequence is you get 20 fewer minutes the following day. Okay, so whatever consequence kind of matches what you see in your family, make sure that it's a reasonable consequence. Make sure you can keep it. So saying you don't get to watch TV for the next week is not going to work because somebody in your house is going to watch TV, and that's just not, unless you don't have a TV, which some people don't. But you know what I'm saying is make sure you can stick to it and stick to it. It's really hard. So much easier in life to say yes. So much easier. No is really, really hard. But you say it, you go back to the fact that it's a family value, you go back to the fact that you understand that it's a difficult thing for them to maybe walk away from, but you kind of stick to those core. And the only other thing I would say that I think comes up, and I think this is a hard one for parents who may enjoy vaping themselves. It is an adult, toy experience. It was primarily designed to help people get off smoking as an adult. much like drinking or other things. There are things as adults that we get to do. And you know why? Because this is all developed. So our ability to think clearly, make logical, have logical consequences, reason, all of the things that Jazzy had up on her slide about that prefrontal lobe development, we're not going to impact our biological development anymore. We could impact our physical development and our health for sure. But in terms of that ability that we want our kids to have to go on and be successful adults, that really comes from that prefrontal lobe development. That is why you know, we do have age limits on certain things in life, like driving a car, and you know, anything else that we would say. I actually think driving a car should be higher than 16, but that's me. And so if you vape, if you smoke pot, if you drink, I don't care. I have my glass of wine at night, but I don't go overboard and I don't say, oh my God, I need this glass of wine so much, my day's been so bad. That is telling my kid I am using this substance for a physical reason and to make me feel better. So whatever you're doing in your household, you are modeling for your kids, no matter what it is, brushing your teeth, making your bed, vaping, drinking, whatever it is. And it is hard for me to say up here, and I am not lecturing you how to live your life, but what you do in front of your kids impacts your kids. And so if you are having a family value about a healthy lifestyle, make sure that you model that. So you can come up with creative ways to have your own adult fun when it's not going to impact them. It won't be long till they're not at home anymore, and then you can do whatever the heck you want to do. But while they're home and while we're parents, we do kind of have to make those tough choices. And so that's kind of all I have. Was there anything about that that sounded right to you or sounded wrong to you that you would say?
I completely hit every point, and I think it's super important to like model for your children, because if your children see you doing something that maybe they're curious about, it gives them a reason to be like, oh, my parents do it. Like, I look up to my parents. Like, it's okay. And, like, I would say that you should model for your children. But I also think that hitting the consequence, not going overboard, I think that's huge, because if you're not able to follow through with your punishment, it's going to make your daughter or son be like, oh, like, it's okay. Like, they didn't punish me at all. Like, they're going to give up on that. They're going to forget about it. But I think it's important, like your example with the gaming, like 20 minutes minus, like whatever you have, like 40 minutes of gaming a week, I'm going to take away 30, you're going to have 10. And like if you follow through every time, then you're like, okay, there's going to be severe consequences if I don't listen to my parents. So I feel like they're going to have more of like an idea of like, okay, they're not joking around, like this is serious. And I also think, adding on, is like if you have two parents come into the room like, hi, like we need to have a conversation, I feel like the daughter or son will be like 2 against 1, and they're going to feel kind of bombarded. And I think it's really important to have like just a one-on-one discussion. Maybe have another parent come into the room later on when it's kind of a settled conversation where you feel like you're having a connection with your daughter or son. I just feel like that's a really good way to approach the situation and to come with it in a positive manner, and like also open to learning about it and having not like, I'm furious, you're grounded, I'm disappointed. Like coming at it like that is going to make your child really defensive, and they're not going to be able to open up to you, and that relationship's just kind of going to diminish itself. So I think that was perfect. Like,
okay,
you hit everything.
I wanted the teenage point of view. Yeah. And so, Linda, are we opening it up for a panel and questions, or okay? And did we have cards for questions, or?
We'll just do open
okay.
questions.
And are we going to tape the questions with a mic? How are we going to do that? Okay, and just repeat the question maybe? Okay. I'm going to give it to Jazzy because she's got all the answers.
I don't know about that. Yeah, I can grab one of these. Doesn't matter. Yes.
What is the age requirement to buy a Juul, and how strict are they on enforcing that?
So California state law, it's a 21 law. So you have to be 21 in the entire state of California to buy any nicotine-based products. As far as strictness, as we know from high schoolers who are using and the data that it's very accessible. And so as far as actually regulating the purchasing, I know that there's a lot of ways around that. As far as same thing with alcohol, we've seen students can have fake IDs. They can access it through people who are of age buying it for them. And there's a lot of access points. And I know, Delaney, do you want to speak on some of those?
I think my nephew got his off Amazon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of the kids do.
I think you can go on if you're logged into your parents' like Amazon account, you can definitely purchase it, or through social media. I know students kind of sell like old jewels, because for these jewels last so long. However, you need to buy pods regularly depending on how often you use jewel. And I think that a lot of students are getting it from friends or older siblings or friends of the siblings or family members like cousins. And I feel like that's just really prevalent. It's just the access to like your resources around your community.
Mm-hmm. And all the kids know the connections of how they can get it. There's always like the Redwood kids, the older kids that they're all connected to. So the access never seems to be a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Is there so obviously you could look around for signs or things hidden, or those little cartridge things, but are there physical signs? Like what does it feel like for a kid? Like what does it feel like?
You get like a head rush, but I know a lot of like people get just massive headaches where they just feel like it's more like a dehydration kind of thing. So they get kind of a headache, but some people get just like a head rush and they're kind of happy in that moment. How long does it last? I don't.
So with or at least with the addiction side of it, when it's kind of hard to tell unless you have someone who is actually addicted. And about the level of, depending on the person, it's going to be different. But the average rate of addiction is about 100 cigarettes. So if you have 100 cigarettes, you're considered to have some sort of chemical or some neurocognition problems going on because you're being rewired. And it does depend on the time, it depends on the person, but once there's an addiction, you can tell certain things like withdrawal. So if someone doesn't have that product near them, they can get anxious, and it's the same symptoms as a smoker because it's the same product. And so there can be increased anxiety, depression, that kind of needing to get out. When there's nicotine toxicity, like when I mentioned some high schoolers, they get domed, quote, is what they call it, then they actually have such a big head rush that they have, because there's so much nicotine in the bloodstream at that time, that they can black out for a tiny moment. And then as far as regular day-to-day, just recognizing it, it would be a slow increase in all of the same things that like cigarette symptoms. It would be that increasing over time.
And like a change in appetite?
Yeah, so nicotine is an appetite suppressant, and so you will see a decrease in appetite, and that's partially because of what I was talking about with the body is they don't get that dopamine release when you eat food. So your body says, oh, I'm hungry, you eat some food, and you get that dopamine release that makes you feel good when you eat food because you were hungry, and you don't have that dopamine release because of because it suppresses it.
And really jittery too. Like it's just like cigarette smoking. It's stimulant. You get jittery, kind of hyperactive. Sometimes maybe a little pale.
Yeah, exactly.
Kind of thing.
I would also say like caffeine. How like some people get like jittery from caffeine, and some people, if you don't eat before, you get a headache. I feel like that's kind of the same kind of
Definitely.
signs.
Would you say there are any changes in sleep patterns that would come from this?
I would say like if you're addicted, and I know individuals who need to like wake up in the middle of the night because they're so addicted and they need it certain hours, or like if you're on a flight and you can't jewel or something in the bathroom, like they get really uneasy. So I just feel like it does affect your sleep if it's at a point where you're very addicted. But I feel like early users, I don't think so. But I'm not
it's
positive.
the same thing with once you've become addicted, it will have all the same impacts as cigarettes. So cigarettes do have changes in sleep patterns, increased anxiety, respiratory problems, and actually having
that appetite suppressant and like the physical things from it. It has all of those same symptoms that we know of at this time. And we don't know as much about vaping because it's not being studied, so it does make it a little bit more difficult. But as far as at this current time, all the same chemicals that have been in cigarettes have been found in e-cigarettes, so we follow suit with the same withdrawal symptoms.
I'd also add on to that, if your son or daughter is like an athlete, juuling really affects their lungs, so they have a hard time breathing. So I feel like that's another sign. So if they're playing lacrosse, soccer, basketball, and you notice like that, you know, they're healthy, they're in good shape, but they're just recently very out of breath, they feel kind of just out of it. And like, I'm not saying like some people just might not be their game, but like, I just feel like sometimes that could be a sign that they're just
and it's
having
the
a hard time
changes
breathing.
that you notice. Like
They're
if their
small.
endurance was all of a sudden decreased and it's not normal for
dramatically.
your child.
Yeah.
I guess I would also say not the physical, but if there's any kind of change in your son or daughter's routine or their, just the general behavior in the house that makes you feel like something's a little off, that intuition is definitely something you should clue into. And so whatever that might be, maybe, you know, whatever a behavior that's different than what they might have had before, you know, just be aware of that and kind of, you know, like you were saying, maybe get up in the middle of the night, but I was thinking more of, you know, not being present and maybe going to the bathroom more often, or, you know, just slight subtle changes in what might be a routine experience for them and your family.
Yeah. Back there and then you.
Are kids combining vaping with other activities? I mean, are they just vaping or vaping and starting to drink more with alcohol and then turning to marijuana, or is it?
Yeah, so vaping there have been studies that once you start vaping, there is an increase in the risk of you starting to use cigarettes. So if a youth starts with a vaporizer, they have a way higher risk of starting to use cigarettes in general. As far as the marijuana and the gateway side of that, there's a lot of people in the media and on YouTube and all across the board that are starting to mix nicotine e-juice and marijuana e-juice together. And they're putting them into these products as well. So they have a combination of both the nicotine and the marijuana effect in one device. So the main difference about the devices is that they heat the contents to different levels. And so THC is released at a different, I'm not sure the exact temperature as in comparison to the nicotine ones. So for example, Juul was created originally by Pax Labs for releasing THC and for marijuana, but they realized that the temperature wasn't releasing the THC. It was a better use for releasing nicotine. And so when they combine them, there is the chance that they're not getting full of either, because if it's hotter, then they'll get the THC and some of the nicotine, but it's going to be a little bit of a different effect. So yes, as far as a gateway, there are more people that are mixing and trying different things. And it kind of follows suit with alcohol and marijuana and tobacco being three of the primary gateways for youth. And does anyone have anything to add?
I think you covered that one.
Yeah, I had a question about addiction. Is marijuana or nicotine about the same? I mean, like, and the way you take it now, or is nicotine far more addictive than THC?
It's far more addictive.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
nicotine
Physically
is more
addictive.
addictive than THC.
I would also say that nicotine's more accessible for teenagers, so they're more likely to get addicted. I just feel like would you say it's cheaper than marijuana or more expensive? I just feel like in today's society, I think jewels are easier to hide and nicotine's easier to use.
It's not there's not as much noticeable impairment.
So they can do it like
with nicotine. So it's an
daily.
easy one to experiment with and kind of get grounded and like I'm doing something, you know, kind of risky and looking around like no one's noticing. And so I think then, you know, they would move into the other drugs that are a lot more noticeable as far as functioning.
I think most people start with nicotine and juuling, and then they're introduced to other things. And I think once they're comfortable juuling, they want to experiment with other like substances.
And just for across the board, though, THC is not as addictive as nicotine as a substance. So nicotine is more addictive, and it's more closely related to heroin, and THC is not quite as addictive.
I mean, back in my day, I'm not an expert in addiction, but marijuana was mentally addictive and habit forming more than even physically addictive at all. I mean, it's not going to change. It's just, but I'm not up on the research, so I can't really speak to if the research has actually found out if it's physically addictive. But back in the day, it was just like more of like a mental addiction, like I need it to get through.
And part of it, though, however, is it is addictive because in comparison to like when you were saying, the potency levels have skyrocketed. And so we do know that from higher potency levels, it has become more and more addictive than how it used to be. So, however, it's not being researched or studied quite as much because it just became legalized. So studies are beginning to start, but there's not as much evidence on how the potency levels are addictive, and they're only studying up to 15% THC at levels right now, currently. So that's definitely it's hard to distinguish the exact rates of addiction from that.
And it does affect your brain, you know, in extreme ways, physically affect your brain, because when teenagers are smoking marijuana, it will kind of, you know, rewire their brains around those addictive receptors and those at-risk activities. So their brain, as an adolescent, is wired to take risks. That's what adolescence is all about, to push the limits, to try different new things. And so they're kind of like predisposed to their brain, you know, going in that direction. And then when they try these addictive and risky activities, there's sort of like another sort of ring around these new neurons forming that's like, oh, it's good, like keep this. So that's more, I think, with the adolescent brain, the part that's really alarming, that, you know, kids need to hold off on smoking marijuana, you know, while their brain is developing, and, you know, hopefully for life.
Oh, I just had one. I just had one like minor thing to add, and I'm glad, Jazzy, you brought up the potency, because the dabbing and the THC concentrations have been found to be even more closely associated with kind of a rush of cocaine, because it hits your brain so fast that then you dip down and you need that potent THC again. So whether it's an addictive, you know, quote unquote addict type of behavior, or if it's just this, you know, negative feeling of having that experience go down again. So we are seeing more of what it would be an addictive behavior from marijuana. And one other thing I would just, you know, getting back to how to talk to your kids, I think what's great about tonight is that you are learning so much about vaping and, you know, about marijuana, that if you haven't had a conversation with your child at all about vaping, now that you've been here, it could be a cool time to just sit down and at a moment when it's, you know, kind of quiet, say like, hey, I went to this vaping presentation today and I learned a lot about vaping. Do you know about vaping? And I think kids don't clue in right away like an adult would, that you're kind of hedging your question in a way that you're trying to elicit more from them. But I think it's also worth, now that we've talked about THC and marijuana and addictive properties and what's in a vaping versus an aerosol and the chemicals versus, you know, a plant, is to be able to really share this education with your child, because it's very likely they don't really know deep down that this isn't good for them. They just know that it's kind of cool. I mean, they probably know it's not good, but they don't know to the extent. So I would just take this opportunity to go home and at some point in the next week kind of just have kind of a casual conversation and just learn about vaping, talk about it.
I also think, quickly adding on, I think that students and individuals see it through social media or Snapchat or Instagram or Facebook, people doing it on these websites and think that like, oh, these like older individuals are doing it. I'm going to high school. I think that's the norm. It's kind of cool. Like it's different. Like haven't really heard anything about it, but like why not? And I think like having that conversation and just letting your kid know that like I'm aware of like this, and maybe they don't know what it is, but it's good that it's going to come from you and not another individual or their friend asking them, hey, like after school we're going to Lucky's, like, hey, you want to come? Like we might jewel. Like I just feel like to get ahead of it is really important. And even though like they might know a little bit about it and they might act dumb or they might just not know anything at all, it's just an important conversation that I bet in the long run will like benefit your child.
Several of my kids are a bit older, and my sense is that their parents have usually discovered they're doing it well after they're exploring it for the first time, and often after they've become addicted. And so I'm just wondering, Jennifer, what advice you have for parents at that point? What is an organization you can do to support people getting off of it when they're already addicted, and what you as a friend would advise as a fellow student? Because, you know, we all have, my mother was addicted until after she got emphysema. She had emphysema and continued to smoke cigarettes. So it's a hard thing to get off once you're addicted. How do you support people in doing so?
Thanks, Claire, for that very hard question. So that's a bit of a Pandora's box, because in my practice I have kids who have lots of different addictions and what I call maladaptive behaviors. And most of the time that a young person gets that far into, you know, kind of self-destructive behavior, there's usually at that point something else going on. And whether it's the chicken or the egg, whether it's the vaping that's causing the anxiety because of the drug and the potency and the nicotine, or was there some underlying anxiety that then kind of prompted that experience of kind of helping yourself feel better. So it's very complicated, because I think you really have to uncover with that individual student and your child what is really happening emotionally for them at that point. And I frankly would say it's probably time to get some counseling. If you can't uncover and you can't really have that frank conversation, and it's gotten to the point where your child just can't stop, then they need a higher level of intervention. I'm a big fan of family therapy. Family systems is incredibly important as we have our kids growing up, and having that safe space to talk about some of these things is important. And then, you know, there are specialists, there are sober coaches, and there's a lot of ways to approach that. It's probably easier for me to answer a specific scenario rather than generalizations, but I think by the time you have found that there is a habitual pattern of using, there needs to be a pretty strong intervention, and that can take a lot of forms. What do you?
Do you want me to add resources?
Yeah.
So as far as resources go for actually treating a habitual user, there's a lot of things that are available. There's a hotline, it's 1-800-NO-BUTS, and that's a national hotline that you can call, and if you have someone in your life that's addicted, it'll talk you through the process of cessation. Another great resource that recently came out from the National Institutes of Health is a smoke-free teen program, and so it's actually an app, and it has a reoccurring text messages that go to that person and say, hey, did you vape today? Yes or no? How are you feeling? How are you going through that? And that just recently came out, so I don't know the evaluations on that, but it's through the National Institutes of Health. That's a great resource. And then if you want to speak on behalf of the school, what happens, I think.
What happens if we find out a kid needs help?
Yeah.
I mean, we would do the same. We would talk to the parents and offer all the resources that's available, see where they are with what they're able to utilize, their bandwidth. We provide counseling in school, and for those who can access it, there's Muir Adolescent Center. It's a big one. That's Muir Woods.
There are many residential programs.
Yeah, there's many treatments.
It's a tough issue to tackle, because we're finding out how addictive it is, and kids are finding how tough it is and difficult it is to get off of this, and there aren't enough adolescent cessation programs out, and I know, Jazzy, you've been in touch with Marin Health and Human Services to try to provide that, because you know, vaping came up so quickly, and then we're just learning in the past like 6 months how addictive it is, and even kids who think they want to quit, they're finding they can't, and they don't have the right tools. So it's another reason to not start, because once you're addicted, it's extremely difficult to stop. And
Yeah.
Have those resources either on a paper or on the site where we could?
Yeah, actually, we have them on the Coalition Connection website. So Linda has the coalitionconnection.org, and you can go on there, and there's a whole section on vaping and resources to it. It has the data that I showed earlier, and it also has the Marin County data on there, and then it has resources to get more information. The Stanford Prevention Toolkit is another great resource for getting information, and then we can provide the PowerPoint and send it all out.
Yeah, we already sent out a PowerPoint of my vaping presentation that I'm going to do for the 7th and 8th graders. It's from the Stanford Vaping curriculum, so that's a really good one that's already out in the parent bulletin, but I can send it to anyone else who wants it. That doesn't include local resources, so that would just be an email to me, and I would let you know all the resources that's available.
And I know at Redwood High School, you can go.
Oh, yeah, the Wellness Center, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, for Redwood, we do have the Wellness Center that a lot of students go to kind of de-stress, but also to get, like, help. But I know Mr. Hirsch, which is the TUPE advisor, Tobacco Use Prevention Educators, which I'm part of. So if an administrator catches an individual juuling, they send him to Mr. Hirsch, and basically he just educates them. He's, like, more of a friend and really kind of gets them through. And I know he's found that he's had a lot of success. So basically they'll go there, they'll watch a video, they do a Kahoot on like what really is like the effects of nicotine, and I've heard very good things that it's been working, and he's seen that like once somebody gets caught, it really doesn't happen again. So I think Redwood's starting to crack down, and all the TAM district are educating staff and kind of not nicely, but like in a good way, in like more of a friend sense, trying to be there for the student. It's like been very beneficial, and they're seeing like a lot of progress.
That training that you just mentioned, it's called Brief Intervention Training, and it happens at all the TUPE specific schools. So Marin County Office of Education runs a program. It's the Tobacco Use Prevention Education, which Delaney is a part of, and she's a peer educator, and it educates the students, and they have site coordinators at each school. So Redwood has a site coordinator, and that's Mr. Hirsch, and he's been doing such a good job with having amazing students like Delaney going out and doing presentations and education throughout the community, and then also doing the brief intervention and going through a 2-part series of seeing where the student is on the stages of change for quitting. And so going through that process with them, and it's a great program.
Oh, okay, sorry. So first of all, thank you for the presentation. It was really informative. And you had mentioned that you were going to talk to the middle schoolers.
Yeah.
Will you guys be presenting factual based? Because that was really effective.
Yeah, I think
I mean, maybe just because
I think a different approach, because I know we are not going to be there for that long, because I think we're going to do Thursday advising. And we know, like I remember when I was at Hall, loved it, but when people would come in and like try to train us, or we'd do the assemblies with a student speaker or like advisor, my concentration, I think I would like braid someone's hair, maybe do something kind of more fun. So I think what we're gonna do is we're gonna do like fun interacting activities with the students, maybe do a Kahoot, do a game, but we're not gonna scare them, but we are gonna give them the facts and kind of give them a rundown on what it is and like what's the consequences. And we're just kind of going to be like peer support, and like they can ask questions if they're curious, or like if they have a misconception or like they don't understand something. We're going to educate them so they understand, where they can walk out of the class and be like, wow, like I had no idea this is like nicotine, like one pod is a pack of cigarettes, and I think they're gonna really like be able to take away lots of information and be educated. And I think especially we're doing 6th graders to hit them at a young age, because we know it's 7th and 8th graders can do it and like that they find their resources. But we're hoping that if you educate 6th graders, that they'll come with the knowledge in 7th grade where they'll be more not susceptible to like have like maybe be peer pressured into it. And I think we're going to start the presentations in February. And then also when they get to high school, it'll be a different kind of presentation. So they do social issues in 9th grade at Redwood, where they learn about kind of the body and everything, but then we are also going to come in and do presentations, a different kind, and we do Q&A where the teacher leaves the classroom and students can kind of ask anything, their worries and tobacco and peer pressure. And we found that it's been like with the surveys, they open up and they really like it. So we're hoping that it's going to help. Yeah.
I had just one quick clarification from my own understanding. You had said earlier when they vape early, there's kind of like this progression. They vape and then I can't remember who said it, but then they tend to move to cigarettes. Does that mean they move to e-cigarettes?
So that was actually a research study. So this research study monitored a bunch of users of e-cigarettes and the risk of them moving to actual cigarettes and tobacco products, and there was a huge increase risk that they are going to move from an e-cigarette product to an actual cigarette product. Yes, so that is actually a study, and I can send the study to you if you come up at the end.
I just don't see anybody smoke. I mean,
totally.
Smoke cigarettes, so.
Yeah.
The question that it was really on my mind is I was walking with my daughter. We were on a walk. She's in 9th grade at Drake, and she was saying, you know, I don't remember how we were talking about vaping, but we were, and she was saying, well, there's this thing now. It's like it's a vaporizer, and it's really just like essential oils, and it doesn't hurt. There's nothing wrong with it. And she hasn't, as far as I know, we talk about this stuff regularly. She hasn't tried it yet, though I can tell she's super intrigued by all this stuff that's going on. And I was like, really? I haven't heard of that before. So I wonder, is this just a misunderstanding?
No, actually, I've had this question before, and this has actually become really common. People have vaporizers of essential oils, they're herbals, everything is being vaporized and inhaled. We have some students that are thinking that they can take an appetite-specific vaporizer, and some people are trying these different things and they're on the market. None of them, like I said, are being regulated. Some of them do not have nicotine. However, they do have chemicals. And I actually have talked to a couple doctors, and every doctor that I've talked to has said no matter what it is, nothing should be inhaled into your lungs, because your lungs don't have the process or don't have the ability to take any sort of oil and get that to go through the respiratory system and out of the body. Your lungs just don't have the capacity to do that. And so what everyone says to me is, what about essential oils or these things? Exactly like you're asking. Yes, these things are all on the market, but no matter what it is, it shouldn't be hitting your lungs, because your lungs can't process anything besides clean air. And so there's going to be some sort of chemicals in there because it's an aerosol, so that it can become vaporized. It could be heated up, all different types of things, but even just an essential oil, that's an oil that's going into your lungs, and it's going to impact your respiratory health.
Oh, I just wanted to add with some of the discussion and even going back to having found, a lot of vaping or paraphernalia, I have found, at least within what my sphere of working, that I hardly ever have a student who just vapes. Most of my students are vaping and doing pot. And so I think if you find a vape pen, that could be the tip-off to there's probably more going on. And I don't know if it's the oral thing. You get more used to having something in your mouth, and then you think pot's going to be the next thing. But I would say that once there is a more habitual use of a vape, there probably is some other drug use going on.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's consistent.
Yeah.
It sounds like.
Getting the pot from is that it seems not as accessible as a jewel pen.
Oh, you can get, yeah, you can, pots.
They know who to get it from.
They can get,
There's like a few students in each grade that you
they know where
kind
to
of
find
know
them.
that they experiment with these kind of products. So especially like I've seen on like Instagram or stories where they'll be like, oh, selling a jewel, $20, or like weed or pot brownies or something that like kind of intrigues kids. So it's not like they're getting it from like, I would say like Amazon or like regular places, but kids are making these kind of things and selling them, which is way more dangerous because you don't know what's going into that. And I think it's really accessible, especially at low costs at any high school. Kids find a way.
Pot,
they know people.
Pot is everywhere.
Yeah.
Ubiquitous.
And all it takes is that one kid. It's oftentimes one kid who has a parent who's a little bit lax, doesn't look at their credit card bill, and that's the kid that everyone else gets it from. Like they're buying it off Amazon in bulk quantities and selling it out to other kids.
I was just going to speak a little to the legality of it, is that, so legally, adults can grow up to 6 plants within their household. So if a parent is growing a marijuana plant, there is access right within the home. Another legality is we do allow recreational delivery into our communities. So there's a online app or website called Weed Maps. Lots of students can just go onto this online device and they can have marijuana delivered. Yes, they do an ID check. So that would mean that someone with a fake ID or someone who is of age could be purchasing and selling to other students. And then there are dispensaries in San Francisco and in Berkeley, as there are retail outlets there. We currently in Marin don't have any retail outlets. We have one medical outlet within our county at this time.
So while you're talking about vaping, you might as well hit cannabis because, you know, the recent California Healthy Kids survey found as low as 7th graders, more than half of them do not believe it's harmful to smoke occasionally. So the perception of harm with cannabis is very low in our county, and the use is high, and the normalization. So those are the 3 factors that I urge you to talk to your kids about, because we know just like vaping, it impacts the brain negatively, and it's here, it's coming. I mean, it's here.
So that's the end of the presentation. Oh, did you have anything else, Delaney?
And if you want to see what a jewel or anything looks like, to like
Feel free to come on up.
I have a whole box of tobacco products, so feel free to come.